Whyyy's industry figurehead, Grandad the Green, once said that video games were never late nor early but arrive precisely when they mean to. And it seems, as of 2020, this 100% historically accurate quote has become prophecy. This year alone, we've seen delays for Final Fantasy VII, Watch Dogs Legion, The Last of Us Part 2, Marvel's Avengers, Cyberpunk 2077, and those are just the big name games! A postponed release has now become an almost inevitable part of video game hype, and while occasionally frustrating for fans, it's generally accepted that a developer taking time to finish a game properly is better than rushing it to hit an impossible deadline. Yet sometimes there are more sinister powers at work, hindering a project for the better part of a decade, and it's a flip of the coin whether these examples age like fine wine or a jar of mayonnaise left out in the sun. Just a side note before we look at the worst offenders, we've taken the total development time into account here rather than just the time from announcement to release, but each one was still notorious for repeated delays whichever way you stack them. We're also only covering games that have been officially released now, ruling out perennial early access abusers, permanent absentees, or cases of pure fantasy like Valve games with a number 3 in them. Now, without any further delay, do you see what I did there? I'm Peter from TripleJump, and these are the 10 longest video game delays. Number 10. Alan Wake, 6 years. Alan Wake's 6-year development cycle seems quite reserved, especially when you factor in how long modern AAA titles take to gestate under normal circumstances. What set Alan Wake apart, however, was the hype around this title after it was first revealed in an impressive trailer at E3 2005. Created by Remedy Entertainment, also responsible for the equally lengthy creation of Max Payne, Alan Wake promised a return of the unsettling psychological thriller in the wake of early Silent Hill titles, pun very much intended. Instead of a heavily armed, combat-ready protagonist, the story followed a struggling horror author whose weapon of choice was a torch, like the Rugrats, which he used to fight off the manifestation of his nightmares that came when darkness set. Much like the protagonist, the studio itself suffered with the nightmare of various iterations of the game, which led to the multiple delays. One prototype build presented the setting of Bright Falls as an open-world sandbox before this was scrapped to strengthen the storytelling and gameplay elements. Alan Wake eventually released on the Xbox 360 in 2010 and on the PC a further 2 years later, and thankfully it was worth the wait. It's a shame the same can't be said for some of the others that we'll get to soon enough. Number 9. Galleon, 7 years. Less notorious, but no less guilty than others on this list, Galleon was a pirate-themed action-adventure spearheaded by Toby Gard, one of the creators of Lara Croft and the Tomb Raider series. In 1997, Gard left his old studio, Core Design, to form a new one called Confounding Factor with fellow developer Paul Douglas, where they could enjoy more creative freedom and pursue projects such as Galleon. Inspired by Sinbad, Errol Flynn, and Disney, this buckle swashler was first due out in 1999, even touted by Gamasutra as a surefire Christmas #1. That commendation has aged about as well as the concept of colonialism, but in their defense, these were the guys who made Tomb Raider and their stock couldn't have been much higher. Sadly though, Gamasutra didn't realise that the game would go through delay after delay, as the development hopped from PS1 to Dreamcast to GameCube and finally Xbox, with a publisher change from Interplay to SCI just for good measure. By 2003, enthusiasm for Galleon had obviously plummeted, with Gard himself saying the team was too small with less than 10 people here now. The game finally released in 2004 to middling reviews, and considering this was the same year as Half-Life 2, GTA San Andreas and Far Cry, it's not hard to see why. Number 8. LA Noire, 7 years. LA Noire might be one of the rare examples of a frequently delayed game being relatively drama-free, apart from the early change of publisher from Sony Computer Entertainment to Rockstar in 2006. The main reason this post-war detective thriller took so long, though, was simply down to the ambition of its developers. With work beginning on the game in 2004, production was lengthy and meticulous, building a realistic depiction of 1950s Los Angeles, a detailed storyline of crime and corruption, and of course, those faces. By today's standards, LA Noire's expansive range of gurning mugs sits firmly in the uncanny valley, but at the time, this was state of the art, and required a custom game engine to make use of their new motion scan technology. This all helped propel the game's budget to more than $50 million, one of the most expensive games of its time. That didn't stop it, however, becoming the butt of many jokes for having a regularly postponed release since its initial reveal in 2005. But there's no doubt it worked out in the end. Yeah, because of the doubt thing in the... because you can doubt things. Let's move on. Number 7. Spore, 8 years. Sure, realistic face flapping is cool enough, but what about a game that literally simulates evolution itself, from a single-celled amoeba to a spacefaring empire? When work began on Spore in 2000, the original working title was Sim Everything, which tells us everything we need to know about Will Wright's grand plans for this most literal of God games. Like LA Noire, ambition was the main reason for its lengthy production time, as the game went through numerous concepts before coming out in 2008. Spore was first revealed at GDC in 2005, and with each impressive E3 demo that followed, came the promise of a release that same year, before the inevitable annual delay. In 2007, the game earned second place in Wired News' coveted Vaporware Awards to honour this track record. While popular with critics, Spore was a victim of its own aspirations. Players were unhappy about the shift away from the realistic-looking early builds towards a more arcadey, cartoony aesthetic, and the lack of depth in each phase didn't really do it any favours. But looking back, it's hard to not give Spore some credit for at least trying something truly unique. Number 6. The Last Guardian, 9 years. Hooray! An entry where I'm going to have to say the word eco several times. Lots of people think it's Ico, but it isn't, but they're going to get angry in the comments. Okay, let's go. If you're familiar with any of Team Eco's work, you'll understand that they don't do rushed games. Both Eco and Shadow of the Colossus each took around 4 years to make, a fairly lengthy commitment for the time, but the studio's next effort smashed that record handily. Development for The Last Guardian started in 2007 and blew E3 audiences away in 2009 with a stunning trailer that introduced the lovable dog catbird thing known as Trico, or is it Trico? But the target 2011 release window was not to be. For a start, the ambitious vision of creative lead Fumito Ueda was difficult to realise on the PS3, so Sony switched focus to the upcoming PS4 instead. Ueda then upped and left Sony and Team Eco altogether in 2011, causing further disarray, but since he was still under contract with Sony to complete the game, his new studio Gen Design, made of many ex-Team Eco members, carried out the work alongside Sony's Japan studio. It's all very complicated. But despite the tremendous upheaval, Ueda's initial vision for The Last Guardian was still intact when the eventual overdue release came around, albeit marred by one very unresponsive and frustrating animal. Number 5. Team Fortress 2, 9 years. Hey, remember when Valve made games? Oh, sure, we've had the excellent VR title Half-Life Alyx and, a Dota card game recently, but the Valve that regularly pumped out hit after hit has been MIA for a while, probably lost under a giant pile of Steam money. Despite this, Valve's reputation for stellar game development remains intact, with heavyweights like Half-Life, Portal, Dota, and of course, Team Fortress. Still played religiously by thousands of people, Team Fortress 2 has weaved itself into the very fabric of gaming, its legacy ingrained in our culture. So it's weird to think, and hard to remember, that this game took its sweet time to bless us with the sandwich-nomming Heavy, the clinically deranged Pyro, and the very punchable Scout. After the success of the first Team Fortress, a popular Quake mod from 1996, Valve hired the modders to develop a sequel starting in 1998. Once again, lofty ambitions were almost its undoing. Early versions were to have a modern war aesthetic and include grand RTS elements like a bird's eye commander role and AI soldiers. It did finally ship with its iconic style in 2007 as part of the Orange Box bundle, but not before it had been literally rebuilt 3 or 4 times. Number 4. Too Human, 9 years. While the hotly anticipated Too Human became nothing more than a high-profile flop by 2008, we'll give it credit for one thing: not many games have hopped between all 3 of the major consoles in the space of 9 years. Developers Silicon Knights first announced this intriguing sci-fi take on Norse mythology in 1999 for the Sony PlayStation. But in 2000, the studio signed an exclusivity deal with Nintendo, which bore such rich fruit as the Twin Snakes remake of Metal Gear Solid and the oft-forgotten genius of Eternal Darkness. Sadly, these hits diverted attention away from Too Human, and in 2004, Silicon Knights parted ways with Nintendo, only to buddy up with Microsoft a year later, announcing a comeback for the stagnating project. Even its estimated budget of $60 to $100 million couldn't save it from becoming a mediocre final product, nor could a promotional fake documentary about ancient frozen Norse robots help the sales to the extent that was needed. And I'm not joking, that really exists. It's called the Goblin Man of Norway. Look it up later. Number 3. Diablo 3, 11 years. Like Valve, Blizzard are a rare sight nowadays as well. A huge company that straddles the sweet spot between immense commercial success and a patient commitment to quality. Well, mostly. Their squeaky clean reputation has suffered recently from very questionable business practices, but in the mid-2000s they were untouchable, thanks in no small part to Diablo amongst their other star franchises. Diablo 2, released in 2000, became the gold standard for loot-hoarding hack-and-slash RPGs, and it was this sky-high expectation that held up the next entry in the series, rather than any internal politics or technical hiccups. Diablo 3 began production in 2001, but the immense pressure of delivering an equally high-quality experience led to Blizzard staff constantly second-guessing themselves, pulling in different directions and resetting work on large chunks of the game. It was officially announced in 2008, didn't come out until 2012, and the long wait between entries, combined with a whole load of server issues at launch, did not sit well at all with the die-hard fanbase. Still, at least Blizzard learned from this debacle and wouldn't dream of angering fans again.
The plan is to be on mobile, both Android and iOS. Do you guys not have phones?
Oh, for Christ's sake, Blizz. Number 2. Prey 2006, 11 years. Prey, or Prey open parenthesis 2006 close parenthesis if you want to get serious about this, started back in 1995 with 3D Realms, which should set off alarm bells for you immediately, as we all know what they did and we all know what's coming at number 1. In just the first few years, this perspective-bending FPS went through multiple transformations as the creators wrestled with the living spaceship setting and complex controllable portal technology years before Valve themselves attempts. They weren't just making a game, but an entire engine, in-house from scratch, with Prey set to be the flagship title, like Unreal was to Epic Games. This caused no end of headaches, and insurmountable technical problems eventually halted production altogether, with head engineer William Scarborough saying years later that, in hindsight, Portal tricks like this should be used as tricks, not as an engine paradigm. In 2001, work on what we now know as Prey began in earnest, with a pre-existing licensed game engine, and 3D Realms commissioned Human Head Studios to finish the job, which they did very well. I love this game. The reason 3D Realms commissioned Human Head Studios to finish the job well was that 3D Realms themselves were too busy with, well, you know. Number 1, Duke Nukem Forever. 15 years. And that's our list. You can follow us on Twitter here, and you can also check out our Patreon page. Okay, fine, we'll do it. Wouldn't that be ironic if you sat through this whole video waiting for something at the very end, only to be thoroughly let down when the entry finally arrived? I mean, that'd be like, say, waiting 15 years only to receive the video game equivalent of a spa treatment at Guantanamo Bay. Now, we're sure almost everyone knows the infamous cautionary tale of the all too appropriately named Duke Nukem Forever. Our favourite repeat offenders, 3D Realms, began work on the sequel to Duke Nukem 3D in 1996, but everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. They switched game engines multiple times, scrapping large parts of the game on every occasion. The project leaders funded the game themselves, avoiding typical publisher deadlines, but by 2003 had only 18 people working on the project. Various E3 trailers impressed the media, but were rarely accurate. It's a comedy of errors. By 2009, funding had dried up, Take-Two had sued 3D Realms over the absurdly long delay, and Gearbox picked up the pieces, dragging this dead horse across the finish line alongside Triptych Games and Piranha Games in 2011. I'm exhausted even for just reading that. The game, with its toilet humour, was absolute toilet, and the Duke, once a king, was now a pauper, a sad, badly aged, inappropriate relic of the past that should definitely have been left there. And that's our list, for realsies this time, but were there any other game delays that left you cold? What about games that you're still waiting for today? Cough. Beyond Good and Evil 2. Cough cough. Let us know in the comments below. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and if you want to support the things you enjoy, then check out the rewards on our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I've been Peter from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.